The house in suburban Connecticut looked like it had been measured twice before anything was placed. Frames aligned, lamps centered, throw blankets folded into quiet triangles. Even the winter light seemed to behave here, slipping in through the bay window with polite restraint, landing on the hardwood floor like a soft apology. Thomas sat at the kitchen table where he'd once drafted entire neighborhoods on tracing paper. Retirement had taken him from blueprints to crossword puzzles, from client calls to the steady ritual of morning coffee. He still wore his watch, though time no longer needed his permission. Anna stood at the counter, rinsing a mug that didn't need rinsing. Her hands moved with the practiced economy of someone who once worked long shifts and learned to conserve everything: motion, emotion, breath. A small radio in the corner murmured the weather, but neither of them listened. The phone call had come earlier. "Can you come in today?" And now the two of them sat in a doctor's office that smelled faintly of sanitizer and something less definable: inevitability. The doctor spoke carefully, as if stepping on thin ice. "I want to be honest," he said. "We're in the late stage. We can talk about treatment options, but realistically, we're looking at about 3 months." 3 months. The words didn't land like thunder. They landed like snow, quiet, steady, accumulating. Anna felt her throat tighten, but her face stayed still. She looked at the doctor's pen, how it hovered above the chart like a bird unsure where to land. Thomas didn't ask, "Why me?" He didn't bargain. He stared at the edge of the desk, at the neat seam where wood met metal, as if the answer might be hidden in the craftsmanship. "What does treatment buy me?" he asked. The doctor inhaled and let the air out slowly. "Time, sometimes, and sometimes uncomfortable. It depends." Thomas's eyes flicked to Anna, not pleading, something more familiar, more private, a look that said, "You know what I'm about to say, don't stop me." "I don't want to spend whatever's left becoming a version of myself I don't recognize." His voice was steady, but there was a faint tremor at the end, like a note held too long. Anna's chest tightened again. She thought of hospital corridors at night, quiet except for the distant beep of a monitor. She thought of families whispering in doorways. She thought of the way love can be measured in small acts: a spoon raised to lips, a blanket tucked under a shoulder, a hand holding on when there's nothing left to hold. Back home, the silence was heavier. Thomas moved through the hallway slowly, as if the house had changed shape while they were gone. He paused in the living room, looking at the bookshelf he'd built himself, the crown molding he'd insisted on replacing when they moved in. He brushed his fingers along the edge of the mantel. He wasn't admiring it, he was saying goodbye in pieces. Anna followed him like a shadow that refused to leave. At the kitchen table, Thomas finally spoke again. "I want air," he said. "I want sky. I want to wake up somewhere new and not have the day already feel decided." Anna swallowed. Her old instincts rose like a tide: plan, prepare, protect. She had seen too much to believe in miracles that arrived uninvited. But she also knew something else, something quieter. People could choose the shape of their days, even when they couldn't choose their ending. Thomas reached across the table and covered her hand. His palm was warm, his grip firm, as if he could anchor her with one simple touch. "Don't look at me like I'm already gone," he said gently. "I'm still here." Anna's eyes stung. She blinked hard, holding back what would not help. Her gaze drifted to the mail on the counter, to the neat stack of bills, to the calendar with birthdays circled in bright ink, all the ordinary things that suddenly felt like props in someone else's life. She stood and walked to the drawer where she kept a folder of household papers, not because she needed them in that moment, but because her hands needed something to do. The folder was thicker than it should have been. Inside were records, notes, printouts, details that could swallow a person whole. Anna slid the folder closed again. She returned to the table and looked at Thomas, really looked. The lines around his eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw, the flicker of longing that hadn't dimmed. "We need to go," she said. Thomas frowned slightly. "Go where?" Anna held his gaze, her voice calm in a way that surprised even her. "Anywhere that isn't here. Not later, not after we talk ourselves out of it. Now." Outside, the afternoon sun leaned toward the trees, turning bare branches into dark lace against the sky. The house remained perfect, quiet, tidy, prepared for a future that suddenly didn't belong to it. Thomas's shoulders loosened just a fraction. In his eyes, something lifted, small but unmistakable. For the first time since the doctor's words, he smiled. And Anna, with her hands folded around his, began to imagine a road. In the daylight, Anna moved through the Connecticut house with a steadiness that looked like calm, but felt like triage. She made lists on the back of junk mail. She wiped counters that were already clean. She stood at the linen closet and stared at folded towels as if they might offer instructions. Thomas watched her from the doorway sometimes, his posture careful, his face softened by a tenderness he didn't know how to voice. He had always believed problems could be solved with measurements and materials. This one had no blueprint. At night, when Thomas slept, Anna opened her laptop at the kitchen table. The screen's pale glow lit the underside of her eyes, the thin lines of fatigue that no foundation could hide. She searched phrases she never expected to type: cash offer home sale, fast closing Connecticut, sell house as is. She found a company that promised speed, simplicity, and no questions, the kind of language that felt like a lifeboat, too bright, too easy, but floating. The next morning, Thomas walked Anna around the neighborhood like it was any other day. Bare trees lined the sidewalks, and the air tasted metallic with winter. He paused by a neighbor's fence to look at a cardinal perched like a small flame against the gray. "Funny," he said, almost to himself. "All these years, and I still notice the same things." Anna smiled, but her eyes stayed on the bird until it lifted off. Some part of her wanted to follow it. The call with the buyer happened in the garage, away from Thomas. Anna kept her voice low and even, the way she once spoke to anxious families at the edge of hospital rooms. "Yes," she said, quick closing. "Yes, we understand it's below market. No, we don't need a showing." She hung up and leaned her forehead against the cold metal shelving. For a moment, she didn't move. A life can be dismantled quietly. One signature, one line, one decision no one else gets to vote on. When she told their children, it was not the sale that landed first, it was the secrecy. Their daughter called her trembling, reckless. Their son said the word capacity like a threat. They spoke in the crisp, careful tone people use when they believe they are being rational, when they're frightened and trying to dress it up as responsibility. "You can't just sell the house," their son insisted over speakerphone. "Not without talking to us, not like this." Anna sat at the kitchen table while Thomas dozed on the couch, a blanket pulled up to his chest. The late afternoon sun stretched across the floor in long amber lines, turning the room into something softer than it deserved. "It's our house," Anna said, quietly, "and it's our time." "You're not thinking straight," their daughter snapped. "You're in shock. We can go to court if we have to, get someone appointed, protect Dad's assets." The word assets tasted bitter in Anna's mouth. Thomas, who built playgrounds and libraries and the kind of homes people dreamed inside, reduced to a ledger entry. Anna's gaze drifted to Thomas. Even asleep, his hand curled, as if holding on to something invisible. "I'm protecting him," Anna said, her voice calm, almost gentle, "in the only way that still matters." There was silence on the line, a silence filled with outrage, fear, and the helplessness of grown children realizing they cannot bargain with time. After she ended the call, Anna sat very still. She didn't cry. Tears were for when the body believed it had space. She had none. The next step was not dramatic. It was paperwork. Anna drove alone to an office with beige walls and a waiting room that smelled like stale coffee. She carried a folder so thick it bowed in her hands. She spoke with someone who explained forms and options in the practiced voice of people who meet grief every day and have learned to keep it at arm's length. A DNR order was not a surrender, it was a boundary, a line drawn in ink that said when the body begins its final work, let it finish in peace. No violent urgency, no frantic machines, no borrowed minutes that cost too much. When Anna brought the documents home, she didn't announce them. She placed them on the table and waited until Thomas was sitting across from her, fully awake, fully present. He read slowly. His eyes paused on certain sentences longer than others. When he looked up, he wasn't afraid. He looked relieved, like someone hearing their own wishes spoken aloud by another mouth. "This is what you want?" Anna asked. Thomas reached for her hand. His thumb brushed the back of her knuckles, warm and steady. "This is what I wanted to ask for," he said, "but I didn't want to make you carry it alone." Anna's lips pressed together as if holding something inside. She nodded once. It was the only way she knew to say, "I'm already carrying it, and I'll keep carrying it." That night, the house didn't look like a home. It looked like a stage set after the actors had left. They packed in silence. Not everything, only what mattered. A few clothes, Thomas's worn leather journal, Anna's old nursing kit she couldn't bring herself to discard, a framed photo from the early years when their smiles were reckless and wide. The Ford Transit waited in the driveway like a secret. Thomas had spent months tinkering with it before retirement truly settled in, calling it a project, maybe someday. Inside, it smelled of pine paneling and new beginnings. A small bed, a tiny sink, curtains Anna had sewn from an old set of drapes, not because she enjoyed crafting, but because it made the space feel human. They moved like teenagers sneaking out, quiet, deliberate, hearts thudding in their ears. Anna turned off the porch light. The dark swallowed the house instantly, as if it had been waiting. Thomas climbed into the passenger seat, his movements careful but determined. Anna started the engine. The dashboard lights bloomed soft green against the night. For a moment, she stared at the glowing clock, watching the numbers tick forward like a dare. Her phone buzzed, missed calls, one after another. Their children, again. Anna set the phone face down. Thomas looked at her, not asking her to answer, not asking her to explain. His gaze carried only one question. Are we really doing this? Anna exhaled slowly and put the van in gear. "Yes," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "We're going." And as they rolled down the quiet Connecticut street, the van's headlights swept over winter lawns, mailboxes, and sleeping houses. Ordinary lives paused for the night. Behind them, unanswered calls piled up like footsteps at a locked door. Ahead, the road opened wide and dark, and for the first time in days, Anna felt something close to air. By the time they crossed out of Connecticut, the world had widened into something that didn't know their names. The Ford Transit hummed beneath them like a patient animal, steady and willing, its cabinet doors giving a soft rattle with every seam in the highway. Anna kept both hands on the wheel, not because the road was difficult, but because holding something firmly helped her keep her thoughts from scattering. Thomas sat with his window cracked, letting cold air cut through the warmth of the van. He watched the landscape change, the way he once watched a building rise, piece by piece, with a quiet wonder. Gas stations gave way to open stretches, trees thinned, the sky seemed to lift higher, as if someone had raised the ceiling. They slept in rest stops and quiet lots where the darkness felt honest. In the mornings, Anna heated water on the small stove, the kettle singing softly like a reminder that rituals still mattered. She packed their days with simple pleasures, a roadside diner in Pennsylvania with coffee that tasted like burnt hope, a thrift store in Ohio where Thomas insisted on buying a ridiculous postcard rack for the aesthetic, and a small park where they ate sandwiches in the sun as if time hadn't been watching. Route 66 didn't begin all at once. It arrived in fragments, old signs, faded paint, the ghost of a promise. When they finally hit a stretch marked by a weathered shield, Thomas leaned forward as though greeting an old friend. "Now this," he said, smiling, "feels like America remembering itself." Anna glanced at him, then back at the road. His cheeks were a little fuller than they'd been the week before. His eyes looked clearer. The laughter came easier. Part of her wanted to believe the road had done that. Part of her knew better. At stops, she moved with the quiet competence that never left her, checking his temperature with her palm against his forehead, watching his breathing when he napped, reading his face for the smallest signs of strain. She kept a neatly labeled pouch tucked into a cabinet, not to hide anything shameful, but to keep order. She followed instructions given by professionals. She tracked times in a small notebook like she used to on hospital floors, because details, when honored, could protect a person. Thomas noticed her care in the way he noticed architecture, the invisible supports that keep everything from collapsing. "You're always doing something," he said one afternoon as they pulled off near an old stone bridge. The sun sat low, staining the horizon in amber. Wind moved through dry grass in waves, as if the earth itself was breathing. "You know," Thomas said, looking out toward the road ahead, "I keep waking up expecting to feel worse, but I don't. I feel—" he searched for the word, then laughed softly at his own disbelief. "I feel like I'm getting away with something." Anna's heart gave a small, sharp twist. She watched him in her peripheral vision, the way his smile lingered, the way his shoulders relaxed when he spoke, the way his gaze traveled toward the horizon like it was a door standing open. "You are," she said, and her voice was gentle. "You're getting away with a good day." They drove through Missouri as the sky deepened into violet. Neon signs flickered along the highway, motels, diners, old tourist traps shaped like dinosaurs and donuts. Thomas pressed his forehead to the glass, grinning like a boy who'd been handed the keys to a secret world. Anna kept her eyes forward, but she held his hand a little tighter, because she understood the bargain she was making, not with medicine, not with time, but with hope. And hope, she was learning, could be the sweetest lie a person ever told out of love. Texas didn't arrive gently. It came like a broad exhale, flat stretches, fierce light, and a horizon that refused to end. Even the air felt different, dry and blunt, as if it didn't believe in softness. By late afternoon, the Ford Transit started to sound wrong. At first, it was subtle, a stutter in the engine note, a faint shiver through the steering wheel. Anna pretended not to notice. Denial, she'd learned, could be its own form of fuel. But when the dashboard flashed a warning, bright as a scolding, her stomach tightened. She eased them onto the shoulder near a town that looked like it had been built to survive, not to charm. A faded water tower, a diner with a sun-bleached sign, a row of low buildings crouched against the wind. Thomas sat very still, hands on his knees, as Anna popped the hood. The heat hit her face like an open oven. She stared at the engine as if it might confess what it needed. Her fingers moved automatically, checking hoses, listening, searching for the obvious. But cars were not bodies. They didn't offer the same clues. They didn't have a pulse you could count, or a gaze you could read. She tried again. The engine coughed, then fell into silence. Thomas pushed the passenger door open slowly. He stepped down, and for a moment his legs held. He stood in the Texas light, squinting at the road, his posture stiff with pride. "Let me," he said. Anna wiped her hands on her jeans, already feeling the ache in her lower back. "It's fine, I've got it." "You've got everything," Thomas snapped, and the words surprised them both. The wind carried the sentence away, but not the meaning. Anna froze. Thomas's jaw tightened, his eyes bright in a way that wasn't anger so much as humiliation, at the van, at his body, at the way the world kept asking him to be strong when he could feel strength slipping. "I didn't mean—" Then he stopped. Anna's throat burned. She felt her own exhaustion rising, hot and sudden, like a storm coming in too fast to outrun. She'd been holding the trip together with careful hands and careful words, carrying joy like fragile glass, carrying fear like a weight strapped to her ribs. "We're just tired," she said, but her voice was thinner than she intended. They walked toward the diner because there was nowhere else to go. Inside, the air conditioning hit them like a mercy. The place smelled of grilled onions and old coffee. A few locals sat scattered in booths, speaking softly, the way people do in small towns where every voice echoes. Anna slid into a booth by the window. Thomas sat opposite her, shoulders tense. The waitress brought water without asking, set the glasses down with a clink that felt too loud. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket. His hand moved with a familiar certainty, as if he were reaching for his glasses. Instead, he pulled out a folded road map, creased and worn, something he'd insisted on bringing because he didn't trust phones to tell the story of a place. He unfolded it on the table, the paper snagged on his trembling fingers. Then his face changed. He patted his pockets again, more sharply, checked his jacket, then the seat beside him. "It was right here," he said. Anna leaned forward. "What is it?" "My pencil." His voice climbed, thin with frustration. "The one I've been marking routes with." Anna blinked. Of all the things, a pencil. But she saw it then, the truth underneath the trivial. It wasn't about the pencil. It was about control, about leaving some kind of mark on a journey that was already stealing so much from him. "I'll find another," Anna said softly. "We'll get you—" "You don't get it," Thomas snapped, his eyes flashing. "Everything keeps disappearing. First my work, then my strength. Now I can't even hold on to a pencil." Anna's hands curled around her water glass, knuckles whitening. The cold against her skin felt like a warning. "You think I don't get it?" she whispered. Her voice stayed low, but it carried the edge of something dangerous. "I've been getting it every day, every minute." Thomas stared at her. His anger faltered, replaced with something raw and startled, like he'd forgotten she was human too. Outside, the sun slid lower, turning the parked van into a dark silhouette against the orange sky. Inside the diner, between the hum of a soda machine and the murmur of strangers, the truth pressed closer. They weren't just traveling west, they were traveling toward the part of the road where love could no longer protect them from fear. And for the first time, Anna wondered, quietly, privately, how many miles were left before her careful calm finally broke. Arizona greeted them like a held breath, wide, dry, and sacred in its stillness. After Texas, the land felt less combative, more ancient. The sky seemed to stretch in every direction without effort, as if it had been practicing openness for 1,000,000 years. The van limped at first, then steadied after a mechanic in a dusty shop outside Amarillo worked with the kind of quiet pride Anna recognized. Men who fixed things not for applause, but because broken things offended them. When Anna tried to pay extra, he refused with a small shake of his head. "Take him somewhere pretty," the man said, glancing toward Thomas. "That's payment." So they did. They arrived at the Grand Canyon in the late afternoon, when the crowds thinned and the light turned honeyed and soft. The parking lot was full of RVs and rental cars, families spilling out with cameras and snack bags, voices bright with vacation energy. Anna moved slowly beside Thomas, one hand hovering near his elbow, not gripping, not hovering like a nurse, but like a wife who had learned the language of balance. Thomas stepped toward the rim and stopped as if he'd walked into a cathedral. The canyon opened in front of him, layered stone, impossible depth, colors stacked like time itself, rust, ochre, violet shadow. Wind rose from below in slow pulses, carrying a scent of dry earth and sun-warmed rock. For a long moment, Thomas didn't speak. His face softened, the lines around his mouth easing. His eyes filled, not with tears exactly, but with something like surrender. "Anna," he said quietly, "it looks unreal." She watched his hands, how they trembled slightly when he lifted them to grip the railing. The metal was cold, but his palms stayed there, as if he needed proof that the world was still solid. "I want to go down," Thomas said. Anna's breath caught. She didn't say no immediately. She let the request exist for a second, like a fragile thing that deserved respect. "There's a trail," he continued, almost hopeful, "just a little way. I don't need the bottom. I just want to step into it." Anna looked at the posted signs, distances, warnings, bold letters about heat and exhaustion. She had read enough charts in her life to understand risk. She also understood something the charts never held, the way a person can be alive in a moment so intensely it feels like defiance. "We'll go slow," she said. They started carefully, the trail sloping down in a series of switchbacks. Thomas held the railing where he could, his steps measured, his breathing audible but controlled. Anna stayed just behind him, close enough to catch him, far enough to let him feel proud. A few tourists passed them, cheerful and unaware. Someone offered a polite smile. Another man nodded at Thomas, as if recognizing something wordless, respect perhaps, or the quiet courage of showing up anyway. After only a short stretch, Thomas's legs began to protest. His foot slipped once on loose gravel, and Anna's hand shot out, steadying him before fear could do its work. He stopped, chest rising and falling faster now, his shoulders tense with frustration. "Damn it," he muttered, and the curse sounded less angry than heartbroken. Anna saw the moment coming, the one where pride and reality collide. She moved in front of him, her face close to his. "Look at me," she said. Thomas's eyes lifted, sharp with stubbornness, damp at the edges. "I'm not a child," he whispered. "I know," Anna said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel under it. She crouched slightly, turning her back to him. "What are you doing?" he asked, startled. Anna gave a small, humorless laugh. "Something I swore I was too old for." She glanced over her shoulder. "Get on." Thomas hesitated. The wind tugged at his hair. The canyon yawned below them like an open truth. "I can't ask you to—" he started. Anna interrupted gently. "You're not asking. I'm choosing." Thomas's hands gripped her shoulders. His weight settled against her, heavier than she remembered, but not unbearable. Not yet. Anna rose with effort, her legs bracing, her breath tightening in her chest. The strain lit her muscles with sharp heat, but she took a step, then another. They moved down the trail in small increments, Anna carrying him a short distance, then stopping so both of them could breathe. Thomas's cheek rested near her neck. His breath warmed her skin. When they reached a small outcrop, Anna lowered him carefully onto a flat rock. He sat, eyes wide, fingers reaching out toward the canyon wall beside them. His hand touched the stone, rough, sun-warmed, older than anything either of them could name. Thomas's palms stayed there, reverent. He didn't speak at first. The silence around them felt enormous, not empty, full. Finally, Thomas exhaled and said, almost smiling, "The time of rock is millions of years, and our time is a blink." Anna sat beside him, her shoulder pressed to his, her hands shaking slightly from the effort. Thomas looked at her then, eyes shining. "But this blink," he said softly, "is beautiful." And as the sun lowered toward the canyon's edge, pouring gold into the shadows, Anna felt something loosen in her chest, a brief, aching peace. Not because the ending had changed, because for a moment, the living had won. They left the Grand Canyon with a kind of silence that follows a hymn, quiet, reverent, almost protective. The van rolled through northern Arizona as evening settled in, the road unfolding like a ribbon laid across open land. Thomas dozed in the passenger seat, his head tipped slightly toward the window, the last light painting soft stripes across his face. Anna drove with her shoulders lowered for the first time in days. Her arms still ached from carrying him, but it was a good ache, the honest kind, earned in exchange for something that mattered. They stopped that night at a BLM campground tucked among scrub and stone. No hookups, no bright lights, just a few scattered vans and RVs spaced far apart like polite strangers who understood privacy. The sky was enormous, black velvet pricked with stars. In Connecticut, the night had always been crowded by street lamps and neighbors' porch lights. Here, the dark felt clean. Anna stepped outside with a small flashlight and a folded blanket. The air was cold enough to sharpen her thoughts. She walked a little away from the van and looked up. And that's when she heard laughter, young, unguarded, floating from the site nearby. A couple stood beside a white van with fairy lights strung along the roofline like a constellation someone had decided to keep. They couldn't have been older than their late 20s. The man held a small camp stove, flipping something in a pan. The woman, wrapped in an oversized sweater, her hair piled in a messy knot, leaned into him as if gravity had been invented for that purpose. They noticed Anna and waved. "Hey," the woman called, softly, careful not to break the night. "Want some coffee? We made too much." Anna hesitated. Her instinct was always to decline, to keep her world contained, but something about the warmth of that small invitation, so ordinary, so human, pulled at her. She walked closer, the gravel crunching under her shoes. "I'm Anna," Anna said. "Jess," the woman smiled. "And that's Eli." Eli tipped an invisible hat with a grin. "We're doing the whole van thing for a few months, sort of a honeymoon that kept going." Jess laughed, cheeks flushed from the cold and heaviness. "We got married in Flagstaff. Cheap chapel, good photographer, bad cake. Best decision of my life." Anna's smile came slowly, like a door opening after years of rust. "Congratulations." Jess noticed the other van, older, less decorated, built for function rather than flair. "You guys traveling too?" Jess asked, her voice bright. Anna glanced back toward her van, where Thomas slept behind drawn curtains. She could picture him curled on the small bed, his hand resting on his chest like he was holding himself together. "Yes," Anna said carefully. "We're heading west." Eli poured coffee into a spare mug and offered it to her. "West is the right direction," he said. "Feels like you're chasing something good out there." Anna took the mug. The heat seeped into her palms, and for a moment she just held it, letting it steady her. Jess leaned closer, lowering her voice like they were sharing a secret. "We keep telling ourselves we're saving every sunset, like we can store them up." Anna's throat tightened. She nodded once, because if she spoke too much, her voice might betray her. Jess's gaze flicked, quick, observant, to Anna's hands, noticed the faint marks, the small calluses, the way her fingers moved like they were used to gloves and gauze. "You were in healthcare?" Jess asked gently. Anna paused. "A long time ago. Nursing." Jess exhaled softly, as if relieved. "Okay, then you'll understand this." She reached into a drawer in the van and pulled out a first aid kit, new, pristine, still too full. "I bought this because it made me feel like an adult, but I have no idea what I'm doing." Anna opened the kit and glanced inside. The basics were there, but the confidence wasn't. She closed it again and handed it back. "Keep it where you can reach it, not buried. The point isn't having everything, it's having what you can find when you're scared." Jess nodded, like she was storing the words somewhere safe. Anna surprised herself then. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn pouch, her own compact medical kit, the kind she kept organized without thinking. She had duplicates. She always carried duplicates. It's how she loved. "Take this, too," she said, pressing it into Jess's hands before she could refuse. "Extra supplies, and a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Anna looked at the fairy lights, at Eli's hand resting on Jess's back, at the ease between them that felt like sunlight. "Of paying attention," Anna said quietly. "Don't assume you get unlimited days. When you have someone you love sitting right next to you, look, really look." Jess's eyes softened. Eli's smile faded into something deeper, more respectful. "Thank you," Jess whispered. Anna nodded and stepped back, retreating toward her van. The night swallowed her footsteps gently. Inside, Thomas shifted in his sleep. Anna sat beside him, watching his face in the dim light, every line, every peaceful rise and fall of his breath. Outside, the young couple's laughter returned, faint, bright, far away. Anna listened like it was a message carried on the wind, not from the future, from the past, her own 40 years ago, calling softly to remind her what love looks like before it becomes goodbye. The morning they reached the edge of the Mojave, the light looked bleached, too bright, too unforgiving. Even the silence felt exposed. The van rolled into a dusty pull-off where the wind carried sand in thin, restless sheets. Anna parked with the nose facing west, as if the direction alone could keep them moving. Thomas had been quieter lately, not sad exactly, more alert, like a man listening for a sound he couldn't name. He'd started watching Anna's routines the way he once watched contractors on a job site, noticing patterns, pauses, the moments she thought no one saw. That afternoon, Anna stepped out to fill their water jugs at a spigot near the campground office. She left Thomas inside the van with a paperback and the faint crackle of an old radio station. The van was warm. Thomas shifted, trying to find a comfortable position, then reached for the extra blanket Anna kept tucked under the bench seat. His fingers brushed a seam he hadn't noticed before, an edge that felt too deliberate. He frowned. A hidden latch. He sat up slowly, heartbeat quickening, not with panic, but with the instinct of discovery. He pressed the latch, the panel gave way with a soft click. Inside was a folder, thicker than paper should be. Beneath it, a small padded bag with medical labels that didn't belong in a travel kit. Thomas stared, as if the objects might explain themselves. He opened the folder first. The letters were clear, official, unmistakable. His name, his date of birth, and the words he had never wanted to see printed so cleanly. An advance directive. A DNR order. His mouth went dry. He'd signed so many documents in his life, permits, contracts, plans that shaped other people's futures. This one shaped the end of his own. He flipped pages, reading slowly, the way you read something that can't be unread. Then his hand moved to the padded bag. Inside were small containers, sealed and organized with the precision Anna brought to everything. Medications for comfort, labels, dosage instructions, the kind of supplies meant for managing pain and easing breathing, not for curing, not for extending, but for making the final stretch gentler. Thomas sat very still, the van suddenly too small around him. He wasn't angry, he was stunned by the weight Anna had been carrying in silence, by how carefully she had held his fear at bay while holding the truth close to her own chest. When Anna returned, the door slid open and she froze. Thomas sat at the small table with the folder laid out in front of him like evidence. The padded bag rested beside it. His eyes lifted to hers, red-rimmed, wet, but steady. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind outside pressed against the van like an impatient hand. Anna's grip tightened around the water jug. Her face stayed composed, but her shoulders sank just slightly, as if something in her finally stopped fighting. "I wasn't trying to trick you," she whispered. Thomas's throat worked. He looked down at the papers, then back at her. "You were trying to carry it, all of it," he said hoarsely. Anna's lips trembled and she swallowed hard. "I wanted you to have good days, not days filled with fear, not days where every smile had an asterisk." Thomas stood slowly. His legs wavered, but he steadied himself against the counter. The movement looked like a man rising inside his own truth. Anna stepped forward instinctively, ready to catch him, but Thomas didn't fall. He walked to her with a careful determination and took her face between his hands. His palms were warm, his touch trembling, his eyes overflowing with something older than grief, recognition. "I thought you were the strong one," she whispered, "so I tried to be stronger." Thomas pulled her into him. Anna's forehead pressed against his shoulder. For the first time in weeks, the sound that escaped her was not controlled. It was raw and human, like a dam finally admitting the river. Thomas held her, rocking slightly in the narrow space between cabinets and curtains. "We're not nurse and patient," he murmured into her hair. Anna clung to him as if the embrace itself was a shelter. Outside, the desert wind kept moving, restless, indifferent. Inside the van, something shifted. The lie wasn't forgiven because it was clever. It was forgiven because it was love, dressed up as protection. And in that quiet, trembling hold, Thomas understood what Anna had been trying to give him all along. Not more time, but better time, the kind you can actually feel, right up until the last mile. California didn't feel like a finish line. It felt like an opening. They came in from the desert, the land slowly softening, first into low hills, then into fields, then into the coastal edges where the air changed texture. The first time Thomas smelled salt through the cracked window, he closed his eyes like someone tasting a memory. "Smells like freedom," he said. Anna didn't answer right away. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, but her gaze kept drifting to him, checking the color in his face, the way his shoulders rose and fell, the quiet fatigue that now lived in his posture. He was still there, still Thomas, but the road had begun to ask more of him than he could easily give. They reached Big Sur on a weekday when the cliffs felt less crowded by tourists and more like they belonged to the sea. The Pacific spread out below them, steel blue and endless, waves folding into themselves with patient rhythm. The light was late afternoon gold, slipping between clouds and making the water look brushed with copper. Anna parked in a small pull-off where the van faced the horizon. She cut the engine, and for a moment the silence inside felt almost holy. Thomas stared out through the windshield, his eyes wide, childlike. "So that's it? The edge?" he whispered. Anna reached over and rested her hand on his forearm. His skin was warm, but thinner somehow, like the world had been quietly taking what it needed. They stayed there a long time. Thomas spoke in small fragments, memories of their early years, a joke about his first terrible mustache, the name of a professor who'd once told him he'd never amount to much. Sometimes he laughed at his own stories. Sometimes he stopped mid-sentence, gaze drifting, as if he'd wandered down a hallway in his mind and momentarily forgotten which door he'd meant to open. Anna didn't correct him. She didn't pull him back. She just followed his eyes and held his hand tighter, anchoring him with touch rather than words. That evening, when the wind rose and the van rocked gently, Anna pulled out her folder again, not because she wanted to look at the paperwork, but because she needed to know it was real, something solid in a world that was starting to feel like sand. The DNR was there, the signatures, the dates, the quiet statement that love could also mean restraint. She made a call from the driver's seat while Thomas slept behind the curtain, his breathing soft and shallow in the way sleep becomes when the body is tired of being brave. A local hospice provider answered with a calm voice that sounded like someone who had learned how to enter grief without making it worse. Anna spoke plainly, no drama, no panic. She asked about services, about legalities, about what could be done to keep Thomas comfortable without turning his final days into a battlefield. The woman on the phone asked gentle questions: where they were parked, whether they had a primary physician's records, whether Thomas had an advance directive. Yes, Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything is in order. Then we can meet you. We can come to you. We'll make a plan. After Anna hung up, she sat in the dark, phone still warm in her hand. Outside, the ocean kept breathing. Inside, she pressed her fingertips to her lips like a prayer she didn't know how to speak. The next day, a nurse arrived at the pull-off in a small car that looked ordinary, almost disappointingly so. No sirens, no urgency, no bright theater of medicine. Just a woman with a canvas bag and kind eyes, stepping carefully toward the van as if entering someone else's sacred space. Anna introduced herself first, then led inside. Thomas woke slowly, blinking at the stranger. For a second, confusion flickered. Then Anna sat beside him and took his hand, their fingers threading together like stitches. This is to help, to keep things gentle. Thomas looked at her a long moment, really looked. The worry that lived behind his eyes for weeks seemed to loosen, replaced with something quieter. "Okay," he said, just one word, short, American in its simplicity, heavy with meaning. That afternoon, the nurse spoke in low tones with Anna, outlining steps, choices, comfort measures, and what to expect without frightening, without pretending. Anna listened like the former nurse she'd once been, but her eyes kept slipping to Thomas, who watched the sea with a calm that felt borrowed from the horizon itself. When the nurse left, the sun was already leaning toward the water. Its reflection stretched across the waves like a path made of light. Thomas turned his head toward Anna. "Promise me something," he said. Anna's throat tightened. "Anything." Thomas's gaze returned to the ocean. His voice was soft, almost peaceful. "Don't let the end be louder than the life." Anna nodded, her eyes shining. She rested her forehead against his shoulder, and together they watched the day fade, slowly, tenderly, into the wide, waiting blue. The final evening arrived without ceremony. No bell rang, no clock announced it. The world simply kept moving, waves folding into shore, wind combing through cypress branches, the Pacific breathing in its endless rhythm as if it had all the time the two of them no longer did. The van was parked in the same pull-off above Big Sur, angled toward the water like a valve. Anna had opened the curtains so the horizon could enter the space. Light spilled across the small countertop, the folded blanket, the edges of Thomas's journal. Thomas lay on the bed with his head propped slightly, his hand resting in Anna's palm. His fingers looked thinner now, but the warmth was still there, still him, still present. His eyes were half open, drifting between the ceiling and the sea beyond the windshield. Anna sat beside him, steady as a lighthouse. She didn't hover, she didn't fuss, she just remained, her posture calm, her touch constant, her face close enough that he could see her, even when the world blurred. A small speaker sat on the table. Anna's phone was plugged in, the battery icon glowing. She'd cued a song Thomas had mentioned weeks ago, a song that had followed them through their marriage like an old photograph, never played every day, but always there when the heart needed language. When the first notes of landslide filled the van, the sound was gentle, almost shy. It didn't compete with the ocean, it simply joined it. Thomas's mouth curved faintly, his gaze found Anna. "You always did pick the right music," he murmured. Anna's chest tightened. "I didn't—" Thomas squeezed her fingers with surprising clarity. He turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. "You didn't sell the house," he said. His voice shook slightly, but the words landed clean. "You carried it." Anna's lips trembled, her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall yet. She watched him, memorizing his eyelashes, the faint crease between his brows, the way his mouth still tried to shape humor even now. Thomas's gaze drifted again to the horizon. The sun was lowering, wide and unhurried, sinking toward the edge of the sea, as if it had done this 1,000,000 times and never once rushed. "Do you see that?" Thomas whispered. "I see it," Anna said. "It's perfect," he breathed. The word didn't sound sentimental, it sounded factual, like an architect naming a structure that finally made sense. Anna leaned closer, pressing her forehead gently against his temple. Her hand stayed wrapped around his, thumb moving in slow circles over his knuckles. The van rocked faintly in the wind, like a cradle. Thomas's eyes closed for a moment, then opened again, searching for Anna's face as if he needed one last confirmation of where home was. "I'm not scared," he said. Anna's throat tightened painfully. She wanted to say she wasn't either. She didn't lie. She chose something smaller, truer. "I'm here," she whispered. Thomas exhaled, a long, soft release. His shoulders settled, his jaw loosened, and in that quiet shift, Anna recognized what her nursing hands had recognized 100 times before, but what her wife's heart refused to accept until it had no choice. The sun touched the waterline. For a second, it flattened into a glowing path across the ocean, bright enough to hurt the eyes. Then the disk slipped lower, and the world held its breath. Thomas's fingers loosened in her palm, not abruptly, not like letting go, but like finishing a task. Anna felt the change, the way you feel a room go still. She didn't scream, she didn't call his name like a protest. She simply bowed her head and pressed her lips to his knuckles as if sealing something sacred. Outside, the sun sunk fully beneath the sea. Day became dusk, and Thomas, who wanted his end to be no louder than his life, took his final trip as the horizon swallowed the light, peacefully, quietly, returning to the wide, waiting blue. Morning came to Big Sur like a kindness that didn't ask permission. The ocean looked the same as it had the night before, steady, indifferent, eternal. Waves kept arriving, folding into shore, retreating again, as if the world had never learned the language of stopping. But inside the van, time had changed shape. It no longer moved forward with plans. It moved forward with procedures. Anna sat in the driver's seat for a long while before she did anything. The windshield framed the Pacific like a painting, and for a few quiet minutes she let herself believe Thomas was simply sleeping behind her, that the night had been a heavy one and the morning would be ordinary. Then she turned her head. She didn't touch him right away. She looked first, his face at rest, the softness in his mouth, the stillness that had finally replaced struggle. In her lap, her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She waited for the wave of panic that never came. What came instead was a strange, almost unbearable calm. She reached for the folder and placed it on the small table, smoothing it flat with the same deliberate care she'd used all through the trip, like making a bed, like closing a wound. The DNR was on top. Beneath it, the papers she'd prepared in quiet moments when Thomas wasn't looking. Contacts, arrangements, a checklist written in her steady handwriting. She made the call. Her voice stayed even, not because she wasn't breaking, but because she refused to let the moment become noisy. The hospice nurse spoke gently, gave her instructions, arrived within the hour. There was no rush, no flashing lights, no public spectacle, just a woman stepping into the van with respect in her posture and tenderness in her eyes. They handled everything plainly, lawfully, confirming the documents, verifying the time, explaining next steps with the careful dignity that turns grief into something survivable. When it was done, Anna sat alone again. She opened Thomas's journal and found the page he'd written the day after the Grand Canyon. His handwriting was slightly shaky, but unmistakably his. "This blink is enough." Anna traced the words with her fingertip. Her throat tightened, but she breathed through it, slow and deep, the way she once coached frightened patients to do. She didn't fight the tears when they came. She let them fall quietly, one by one, onto the paper, like punctuation. The legal work in California took days, not because anyone was cruel, but because the world runs on forms, even when hearts don't. Anna drove down to a small office in a coastal town, signed what she needed to sign, asked questions with clear precision. She didn't hide anything. She didn't embellish. She simply told the truth. Her husband had wanted peace, and she had honored it. Their children arrived on the third day. Anna saw them first in the side mirror as they stepped out of a rental car, older than she remembered, not in years, but in worry. Her daughter's hair was pulled back too tightly, her eyes rimmed red. Her son moved like someone carrying anger as armor, though it looked heavier now that the battle was over. They walked toward the van slowly. Anna stepped outside to meet them. The wind lifted strands of her hair, and she didn't tuck them back. She didn't perform strength. She simply stood. Her daughter spoke first, voice brittle. "Where is he?" Anna pointed toward the ocean. "He's at rest." The word sat between them, not a weapon, not an excuse, a truth. Her son's jaw clenched. "You didn't tell us," he said, but the accusation lacked heat. It sounded more like grief looking for a place to land. "I know," Anna said softly, "and I'm sorry for that part." She held his gaze. "But I'm not sorry for giving him what he asked for." They stood in silence. The Pacific kept breathing. Then, quietly, their daughter began to cry. The kind of cry that isn't pretty, isn't controlled, doesn't care about pride. Anna stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her. A second later, their son joined them. his shoulders shaking once, as if something in him finally gave up pretending. They stayed like that for a long time, 3 bodies holding each other in the wind, the van beside them, the ocean in front of them, the sky above them wide enough to contain what words couldn't. Later, when the children had left to rest, Anna walked back toward the campground loop. The fairy light van was there again, the young couple, Jess and Eli, packing up. Jess saw Anna and froze. Her smile faded. She didn't ask questions. She simply stepped forward and took Anna's hands. "I'm so sorry," Jess whispered. Anna nodded, her face calm, eyes bright. "Don't waste your days, that's all." Eli swallowed hard, then handed her a small envelope. He said, "We wrote something, a note, for him, I guess, or for you." Anna tucked it into her pocket without opening it. She didn't trust herself yet. Before she left, she held out the van keys. Jess blinked. "Anna, we can't." "Yes," Anna said, and her voice was gentle but final. "This home did what it was built to do. Now let it carry someone else's love." Jess's hands trembled as she accepted the keys. Anna turned away and walked toward the shoreline, alone now, but not empty. The sand shifted under her shoes. The wind pressed against her like a hand at her back, not pushing, just reminding her she was still moving. When she reached the water's edge, she stopped. The horizon was bright, wide, indifferent, and somehow comforting. Anna breathed in the salt air and let it fill the space where panic used to live. She didn't know what her next chapter would look like, but she knew this: the love didn't end in the van. The love became the road. And for the first time, walking along the Pacific with nothing to carry but her own life, Anna felt something she hadn't expected to feel so soon after goodbye: a quiet, steady beginning. This story is not about illness. It is about choice, about what we do when time stops being an abstract idea and becomes something we can almost count on our fingers, about how love changes shape when it realizes it cannot win but still refuses to walk away. Anna did not save Thomas from death. She saved him from fear. She understood something many of us avoid for an entire lifetime: that living well and living long are not always the same thing. Thomas chose dignity over duration, presence over procedures, a hand held at sunset over a room full of noise. And Anna, who had spent years caring for strangers, learned the hardest lesson of all: that love sometimes means carrying unbearable weight silently so the one you love can walk lighter. This journey reminds us that home is not a building. Home is where someone knows your breath, your fears, and still chooses to stay. Letting go is not giving up. Sometimes it is the bravest form of staying faithful. Time does not measure love. Attention does. Presence does. The courage to look at someone fully, especially when it hurts, does. For those of us watching from the outside, safe in our extra tomorrows, this story asks something quietly radical. If you knew your days were limited, would you spend them the way you do now? What conversations are you postponing because they feel uncomfortable? Who in your life deserves more of your attention, not later, but now? And if love asked you to choose between more time and better time, which would you choose? Many of you listening have walked a similar road, some as caregivers, some as witnesses, some as the ones being held. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a regret, a quiet gratitude, we invite you to share. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to make a difficult choice for someone you loved? What did that experience teach you about life, about love, or about yourself? Your story may be anonymous if you wish. It may be brief or long, but it matters. Because when we share these moments, these blinks of time, we remind one another that none of us walks this road alone. And that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy of love.